Hey everyone, and welcome. So let's talk about stress. We all use that word, right? We feel it with work, with family, just with life. But what is it, really? It often feels like this vague, overwhelming thing. But behind that feeling is a truly incredible scientific story. So today, we're going to unpack that story, the journey of how stress went from just a feeling to actual hard science. You know that feeling, that knot in your stomach? Your heart starts racing a little bit? Yeah. If you've ever felt that, you are definitely not alone. I mean, stress is probably one of the most universal human experiences out there. But just because we all feel it doesn't mean we really get what's going on. Okay, so let's get a baseline here. What are we actually talking about? At its core, stress isn't about the situation itself. It's all about the gap between the challenge you're facing and your perceived ability to handle it. And that word, perceived, is everything. It's the whole key, and we're going to circle back to that later, for sure. And get this, not all stress is bad, which sounds kind of wild, right? But there's what scientists call eustress. That's the good kind. It's that little kick that motivates you, that sharpens your focus to nail a presentation. And then, of course, there's distress. That's the one we all know and, well, don't love. The kind that's overwhelming and just causes problems. So the goal isn't to get rid of stress entirely, but to know the difference. So how in the world did we figure all this out? You know, for the longest time, stress was just this big mystery. And the journey to understand it took some really interesting twists and turns, moving from something that was just in our heads to something happening in our entire body. So if you go back to the early 20th century, the thinking was all psychoanalytic. Stress was some deep internal conflict from your childhood. Then the behaviorists came along and said, no, it's a learned response to stuff in your environment. But the real game changer, the big shift, happened around the 1950s. That's when scientists started asking a totally new question. What is physically happening inside our bodies when we feel this way? And this was the moment everything changed. Seriously. The focus shifted from just our thoughts to our actual biology. All of a sudden, stress wasn't just a vague feeling. It was something you could actually measure in the blood, something with a physical pattern. And the guy right at the center of this whole revolution was a scientist named Hans Selye. He's the one who discovered that our bodies have this surprisingly consistent, predictable way of responding to any threat. It doesn't matter if it's a lion chasing you or an angry email from your boss. He called it the general adaptation syndrome. So Selye mapped it all out in three basic stages. First up is alarm. That's the initial shock, your classic fight or flight kicking in. Then, if the threat sticks around, your body moves into resistance. It's adapting, it's coping, but it's burning a lot of fuel to do it, and your immune system can take a hit. And finally, if that stressor just won't quit, you hit exhaustion. Your body's resources are just drained, and that leads to burnout and illness. Okay, so what's going on under the hood, chemically speaking, during that alarm phase? Well, your brain's HPA axis, you can think of it as the stress command center. It just hits the big red button. And that floods your system with hormones like adrenaline for a huge energy boost, noradrenaline to make you super alert, and cortisol to get all your resources ready for action. This chemical rush is exactly why you get shaky, why your heart pounds, why you get that butterflies in your stomach feeling. It's a direct physical reaction. Okay, but Sully's work left this huge dangling question, right? If our bodies all react in pretty much the same way, why do some of us totally crumble under pressure while other people seem to just thrive? Well, that question led us to the modern view of stress, which brings everything together, our biology, our psychology, and our personal history. And the key idea here is something called the diathesis stress model. Now, diathesis, it's a fancy word, I know, it just means vulnerability. The idea is that we all have these pre-existing vulnerabilities, and when life throws stress at us, those two things interact. Think of it like a nature plus nurture kind of deal.
So where do these vulnerabilities even come from? Well, it boils down to three main things. First, you've got epigenetics, which is the mind-blowing science of how life experiences can literally turn our genes on or off. Then there are adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, things like early trauma that can wire our brains to be more sensitive to stress later on. And finally, something as fundamental as your personality type.
Let's zoom in on that last one for a second. Personality. We've all heard of type A and type B, right? A type A person is often really competitive, always in a hurry, and that can lead to being highly reactive to stress. On the flip side, a type B person tends to be more chill, more easygoing, and naturally less reactive. And look, it's not that one is better than the other, not at all. It's just different wiring. Okay, this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. And honestly, it might just be the most powerful one of all. We've covered biology, we've covered our personal history, but what about your mind, right here in this moment? What role does it play? And that's where a psychologist named Richard Lazarus comes in with this totally game-changing idea. He basically said, hey, what if stress isn't what happens to us, but how we interpret what happens to us? His whole theory, the stress appraisal theory, put our perception right at the center of the story. So he said our brain runs this super fast two-step check on everything. It happens in a split second. First is what he called primary appraisal. You're basically asking, is this a threat or is it a challenge? Then comes the secondary appraisal. Okay, do I have what it takes to deal with this? Do I have the resources? And here it is, the big takeaway. Stress, it lives in the gap. The gap between your answer to that first question, how big is this problem, and your answer to the second one, how capable am I? If the challenge feels bigger than your resources, bam, you feel stress. It's that simple and that profound. And that leaves us with a really powerful thought, doesn't it? We can't always change our genetics or erase our past. And we definitely can't always change the stressful things life throws at us. But if perception is the final key, if stress lives in that gap, then the most powerful tool we have is our own mind. So the question is, what part of your own stress story could you choose to rewrite? Hey, thanks so much for digging into the story of stress with us. If this explainer helped make sense of this really complex topic, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button for more. We'll see you in the next one.